Hello and welcome to episode 134 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by John Luke Chaparro. John Luke, last time we spoke, man, WBC was rocking. Obviously, the tournament ended on Monday, but what an incredible tournament. Obviously, we know Venezuela prevailing over the U.S. Nolan McLean gets to start in that championship game, does not pitch bad at all. But unfortunately, the U.S. bats just could not wake up. And that kind of felt like the theme of the whole tournament. Bryce Harper, it's a big home run late, but all for naught. And the U.S., like I said, goes on to lose to Venezuela, but just a great tournament. In particular for me, I know we talked about it a bunch. Italy kind of being the story of the tournament for me. They lost a hard-fought game to Venezuela, to the eventual champions in the semifinals. But just great for baseball. You really have to be thrilled if you're a fan. Knock on wood, there were no injuries, really, no major injuries for the most part. So you love to see that. Yep, exactly. But you really can't ask for much more. If you're a baseball fan, this was awesome. You want to hope that they can build on this. I know Max Scherzer made a suggestion on how maybe you can make this a little better schedule-wise, which I happen to agree with. But just really a lot of fun couple weeks of baseball here before opening day starts, and just kind of what a letdown. You go from this now back to spring training. It's like, whoa, the bubble being burst. But like I said, man, a lot of fun couple weeks of baseball, and a lot of countries showing that they can compete with the best in the world.
Right. Yeah, you couldn't have asked for a better final game, with Venezuela absolutely showing out, and no one expected Venezuela to win. First and foremost, nobody expected it. They had a very quiet tournament in the sense that because they were overshadowed by the United States and their whole controversy with the manager and the players and Bryce Harper, and then Dominican Republic, and then also with Puerto Rico and the insurance issue, Venezuela kind of slid under. And also they were, kind of overshadowed by Team Italy, with, trying to grow the game out there as well. But, Venezuela has always produced superb ball players.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about, basically going from guys like Johan Santana, Andres Galarraga, you can go on forever. And that country has, Miguel Cabrera. How could you forget? Miguel Cabrera himself. So it's not a surprise that Venezuela was there. A lot of hard throwers on that team too. Sure. But the United States, they were, as much as we were making fun of them, myself included, they made it to the final. Got to give them props where it is, but they just didn't come through at the end of the day. And just again, we hammered this point a lot over the last couple podcasts when we were talking about this tournament, but you can just see the difference in enthusiasm, and that's such a good thing for baseball, because this is a sport that is essentially trying to get back into the graces of the good graces of this country, and having a tournament that good, that flashy, that exciting can only mean wonders for baseball. And it's good timing, even though it's only about a week and a half difference. You're going to hop right into opening day. You have Yankees Giants on Netflix. You have Mets Pirates and a whole slew of games on the new NBC baseball deal. So this excitement is really going to linger over onto next week's games, and I love it. This tournament, I explained my energy and love for this tournament, before. But being Puerto Rican, I love seeing Puerto Rico being represented. I love seeing all these other countries being represented, and it's just so good for the sport. Anybody that tells you that this tournament means nothing is sort of a Debbie Downer.
This for the Americans, probably, but yeah.
yeah. This is great for baseball. You cannot ask for anything better. And honestly, I'll say this, maybe I'm a bit biased on this, but just looking at the sport now and looking how the NBA is constantly getting criticism, I think baseball is going to be right there at number 2, and could potentially, if this excitement keeps going on, could really give the NFL a run for its money. So, and then also very good that Nolan McLean did not get hurt. That was the one thing I was very concerned about, but he looked phenomenal in the 2 starts that he made. He, people want to say, oh, well, he gave up a home run, this and that, whatever. They were solo shots. a sac fly and a solo shot, 2 runs in 4 and change innings. You can't ask for anything better in a situation where usually this is the time of year where pitches are ramping up. And the fact that he was able to put that performance this early on in the year, that's a positive sign. It's also a positive sign for the Mets. But the World Baseball Classic, home run, no pun intended. It knocked it out of the park. And I really can't wait for the next iteration in the next 3 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with most of what you said. I mean, it was a lot of fun. With the way things are going now, I mean, there's no reason why baseball can't, fit in that top 2, 3 sports in the country again. With what's going on and the momentum they kind of currently have, football to me is, I think, always going to be king. I don't know if that's ever going to get supplanted. But listen, baseball is called America, is passed on for a reason. It was for a long time. And the great game is in a great spot. To your point, just the amount of talent, young talent that's in the sport. So it's really, it's been a lot of fun. To the point of just maximizing this thing, maybe, and getting all the best players to play, sort of thing. I know Scherzer had made the point. Maybe what you should, a suggestion is for starting this tournament 2 weeks later than it started, and shortening the MLB regular season by a week. I think that might be great, because at that point you're at, pitchers are at the end of spring training, so they're, lengthened out as it is. You probably, and like I said, you probably would get more pitchers, maybe more major leaguers to do it, especially top tier guys. So that would be interesting. We'll see if maybe that's something they kick down the road over the next couple of years, the next iteration or 2, whatever. But, I think that's an interesting suggestion, just as, again, there's no good time to have this thing, like we keep saying, especially for pitchers. That's the biggest problem with the whole thing, that they're not lengthening out by this point. They're still, progressing through spring training to get, ready for a major league season. So if they can kind of push this back by a couple of weeks, so guys by, the end of spring are, kind of ready to go, that might be good. But as a whole, you mentioned it. It's just a lot of fun. And, hopefully the sport can build on this momentum. We know it's kind of looming after this year, but, hopefully that, with the way you mentioned Netflix and Peacock and all these different services now and platforms that baseball is going to be on too, that they can parlay this into just, an exciting regular season. I don't think that there's no reason that there shouldn't be, with the abundance of talent there are, even outside of the Dodgers, right? That's what everybody talks about. But the sport as a whole is in very good hands as far as the talent is concerned.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, touching on Scherzer's point, there's a documentary on MLB Network called the Clásico de Clásico, and it's basically a documentary about the Puerto Rican national team, about how they go about, preparing for the Classic and what that tournament and what baseball means to Puerto Rico. And Carlos Delgado made a point when asked about the tournament when he first started, when they were discussing the tournament in 2005, because he was obviously one of the inaugural members of Team Puerto Rico. He said, he was speaking Spanish, but to paraphrase, he basically said that there is no good time to put this tournament on, because, and then he goes on to say, if you go spring training, it's too early. It is too early, admittedly so. If you put it in the, during the World Series, kind of like similar to what the World Championships in the NHL does, the IIHF runs that tournament as the Stanley Cup playoffs are going along. And it ends probably around just right before the Stanley Cup final begins. So in that case, that would be relative to them starting that tournament right as the World Series begins. And by that time, Delgado mentions that pitchers are already banged up. So you have either 2 options: either have it in the spring, or you have a similar break that the NHL has with the Olympic break, like we talked about before, and kind of widening the All-Star break by having the All-Star game and then having the 2 extra weeks of just the tournament, which is, you can definitely do that. So there's not a perfect time, but again, this is huge momentum for the sport. Major League Baseball, outside of the looming lockout, is finally beginning to take its stand and get its footing on modern platforms. You have these RSNs that are beginning to expire, and Major League Baseball is taking back a lot of the rights for productions for the game. So that allows them more options to spread the games out more evenly. Amazon has some things where they're able to distribute some games. Netflix is potentially going to get into that business at some point. ESPN has MLB TV. So the excitement and momentum that this tournament has, regardless of where you put it, is such a boon for the game that the only thing that can really kill it is a lockout. Whether that remains to happen or not is who knows. But, just to add to the point that Delgado said and also what Scherzer said, there's really not a good time to put the tournament, but having it, that's a good alternative to have it, right at the end of spring training. But another option would be out in the summer. So I definitely understand where he's coming from with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was proponent of the summer thing. If I would do that, I wouldn't have an all-star game altogether. I would put like an all-pro team or whatever, and then you just have the tournament. But I understand guys like to play in the all-star game. I don't know if the league wants to lose that and take 2 weeks out of the middle of the year. So after kind of hearing what Scherzer was saying, I think that might be the best option. You start this thing at the end of spring training, and you take a week off the regular season. You figure it out. Because like we said, it's about pitching. It's about guys being able to be lengthened out, and by that point, they would be they're ready for the regular season. So we'll see. But no matter what, it was a very good tournament. It has people talking about baseball, which is a great thing. And like I said, hopefully they can just build on this for an exciting regular season. And it's kicking off on Netflix of all places. Yankees and Giants in less than a week. Less than a week, 25th, I believe, is the first game.
Wednesday night.
So we'll move on from the World Baseball Classic back to MLB and the Mets. With that being said, we talked about Nolan McLean. He obviously pitched well in his couple starts in the WBC, and getting to be around those kind of guys, hopefully has a positive impact on him. I wonder how those kind of starts, high stress, high impact starts early in March will affect him and his workload throughout the year, but that kind of remains to be seen. But, that's something to be excited about. We know what he brings to the table. And another guy, I mean, we'll kind of talk about the outfield, but just, Carson Benge, he's having a tremendous spring. Reports are coming out at this point. It sounds like he's going to be making the team at a spring. I didn't think that was going to be the case with the Super 2 rule and all that. But he's been absolutely tearing the cover off the ball. He's probably been the best hitter the Mets have had in spring, to be honest. Had a great spring, the spring breakout, which they do with the prospects now. He had a great game in that. And, it seems like the Carson Benge era is going to be starting in Flushing against Paul Skeens, is what the reports are kind of looking like so far.
Yeah, Carson Benge, kind of to not many of our surprises, has been phenomenal. It's nice to finally see that this organization is drafting and developing really solid and professional type hitters, because that always seemed to be the issue. Great pitching factory. You could throw anybody in the Mets system in previous years, and the pitching would just come out and just be absolutely stellar, But there was always sort of an issue with hitting. They could never really get, their foothold on trying to get somebody who can immediately come in. But, this was probably one of David Stearns' first picks as president of baseball operations, and they clearly, again, I'm not trying to, throw a bunch of puns here, but they hit a home run for now. He's hitting .412. He's got a 47 on base percentage and a 987 OPS. Doesn't have a home run yet, but that will come in time. He probably has some of the best bat to ball contact in terms of a swing on this team outside of Juan Soto. He seems very methodical at the plate. His approach is very calculated when he's at the plate. He likes to go the other way. I've seen a lot of solid hits going the other way, finding the holes, hitting the ball where they ain't, as cliche as that sounds. But I mean, you're hitting .412 against pretty much mostly major league and semi-major league pitching. That leaves an impression, and that works for the Mets because that now gives them options. Because then you have a potential safety net in Carson Benge if something happens to Luis Robert, or let's say Mike Tauchman doesn't end up working out. He's there if he continues to produce. And it's also Tyrone Taylor, So this all really is just a surprise, but also not a surprise at the same time. But it's also, and he's looked really good as a defender in the outfield too. Has a pretty good arm, He could probably, as he plays in the majors and he goes through the motions, he'll bulk up a little bit more, put on a little bit more weight. But overall, this is turning out to be a huge opportunity for the Mets to show off their farm system, because you have guys who are basically getting ready to follow Benge, like AJ Ewing and Jacob Reimer, just to name a few. So it's really positive to see that there's a guy who they drafted, who they only drafted him in 2024, and he's already not even 2 years in the minor leagues, and he could already potentially be on the team. Joel Sherman said that he essentially made the club, but the club hasn't officially announced it yet. But that's just a positive sign for not only the Mets currently, but also just player development overall. And then you look at a guy like Mike Tauchman, who, was kind of like a last minute signing. I think they signed him right as camp began. And although he's not hitting over 400, he's got 7 hits. He has 5 runs scored, 6 RBIs. He has a 250 batting average, 382 on base percentage, and an 846 OPS in spring so far. That's not bad for a reserve outfielder. Mike Tauchman has power. That can be your power bat from the bench. One of the issues that this team had last season was that there wasn't really anybody you could count on in the bench to really hit you a home run. All those guys were in the starting lineup. So having a guy like Tauchman is not only insurance to Carson Benge, but also having a legitimate major league power bat on the bench is really beneficial, because you look at the Mets not having a comeback after 8 innings. That's largely due to the fact that a lot of the people that they would bring in to pinch hit, granted, there was a lot of contact, but there really wasn't much power.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what was sacrificed on the bench for, contact was also a lot of strikeouts on the bench. Will I say that Tauchman will be a savior? Who knows? But he's been a solid bat. He's been a good glove. This is the type of guy that you built depth around. And whether he's here or in AAA, he definitely deserves to get a shot. And I think this is another, low-key signing by Stearns that just knocks it out of the park. Again, no pun intended, of course, because we're talking baseball. But the Mets did really well. This is what you call a good problem. And this is really what you want to see. And the fact that both these guys are going to be on the team really bodes well for this ball club.
Yeah, no, I think Tauchman's definitely a solid 4th, 5th outfielder. Like you said, someone that has some pop, a decent glove, and for if you need him for a stretch, for 6 weeks, whatever it may be, you don't hate that. He's someone who can hold water there, like you're saying. But as far as Benge goes, yeah, man. Another thing I was thinking of too, that the Mets, as far as with the service time thing, they can have him on the opening day roster, and if he's struggling the first 2 weeks of the year, they could send him down, and it doesn't matter. It's has to do with service time, so that wouldn't affect things either way. So I think, as far as they're concerned, it seems like he's done everything they can to keep him or put him on the roster, and it seems like they're going to reward him and do so. He's going to be playing right field where he played, in his college career, so he's comfortable there. He's got a good arm, like you were mentioning, good defender, and hits the ball really hard. That seems to be shown in the numbers, and like you said, just as far as high batting average, that sort of thing, he takes what pitchers are giving him. We'll see what happens when you're facing Paul Skeens in the cold at Citi Field in March. But it seems like he's got a mature approach, understands what his swing is and what he's trying to do. And to your point, someone that has power that like him already, he's kind of slight of frame. And, like you said, he's a young player that you would assume over the next few years, as he kind of, grows into his body a bit more, whatever, is going to add some muscle as well. So you're excited, what that can be. But, if you're a Met fan, I think we're understanding now why David Stearns was so comfortable with letting the franchise home run leader walk out of the door. Because obviously you signed Juan Soto last year, that kind of speaks for itself. But for what they think a player like Carson Benge can be, and for right now, and hey, we saw it with Alonso, 7 years ago, whatever it was, when he made the team out of spring as well, and we know the rookie season he had. So, maybe hopefully Benge could be on that sort of track, because then the Mets, like you said, have really done well with this pick and can be a player that they can, lean on,
Right.
paired with Soto and Lindor for years to come. Go ahead.
And I'm sorry, one quick thing just about Tauchman. Now, I'm not saying that, if anyone misunderstands what I'm saying, is I'm not saying that Tauchman's going to hit you a ton of home runs. He's not. He's a good, solid contact hitter for the most part, but he does have pop. And granted, he only has 41 career major league home runs, but in looking at what he did in the minor leagues, he has, through 11 seasons, he has 53 home runs career. He has 13 home runs overseas, and basically through 15 seasons, all through the majors, the minors, and in Korea, he has 110 home runs. Now, if you look at a lot of his playing time, he's been basically relegated to a bench spot. So while he can get you the home run, he can also get on base. He's pretty much had a high on base percentage for most of his career. So you mix that potential power with high on base and just, again, knockout signing for the Mets for depth.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I know another thing we were talking about too, just real quick. It sounds like Bo Bichette's taking reps at short now, that he's going to be the backup shortstop on the roster. Listen, again, we know why Bo Bichette got brought in here and paid all that money. It's not for his defense. We understand that. Yep, exactly. But he's someone that before this, and outside of the postseason last year, was a shortstop his entire career. We know he's not a glove first player, but that does make sense. From that standpoint, if Lindor ever did go down, having someone that has played the position before, for the majority of their career, makes a lot of sense. Obviously, knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't need to ever happen. If Bichette's playing short every day for the Mets, then things are in bad straits. But just another thing that happened there to report on, and makes sense from the Mets standpoint, especially if they think maybe Lindor is not going to be ready for, for opening day or something like that. It can't, certainly can't hurt. Considering some of the shortstop replacement names that we saw, through spring so far.
Yeah, I think I'm more comfortable with Bo Bichette playing third base and shortstop than Vidal Brujan. And this is no slight against Vidal Brujan.
Sure.
Bo Bichette's bat compared to Brujan's bat is far different. I would rather, if Lindor, it has to be either put onto the side or replaced for the time being because he's still recuperating from the injury, I will take my chances with having Beatty at third and Bichette at short.
Yep.
Bo Bichette is, granted his defense has not been much to be desired, but he's looked really solid at third so far. He's had a couple of hiccups at the beginning, but it seems like he's smoothed a lot of that out. And I think also too, just kind of he has a good arm, so I think that plays well at a position like third base. He's been training with David Wright in the spring. He's getting a lot better reads to the ball when it's hit to him at third. So I think that could benefit him, having moved over there. But again, it's nice to have that insurance. And again, this just also kind of, talks to the versatility that they wanted on this club that they really didn't have last season. They tried to do it with Jeff McNeil. They were slowly implementing it with Brett Beatty, and now he's going full bore as a utility player this year. So in the case that Lindor doesn't do well at short, or he, is having to be taken out, or, the injury ends up barking up again, you can easily throw Polanco at first. You can even throw Tauchman at first base. Tauchman, Polanco at first, or you could even put Polanco at third if you need to. Beatty can play third. Bichette can play short. Polanco could play short. So they really put themselves into a good corner here, having Bichette, take reps again at short, because it really gives them more to go off of. And of course, we all know they signed him because of his bat. I mean, I don't have to say that. We've talked about this ad nauseum on the site, on this podcast, and basically online. So you pretty much get a Lindor type bat to fill in for Lindor when he's not there. You did something right.
Yeah, no, good point. And, like we said, hopefully Lindor is ready for opening day. Hopefully there is no extended time or anything like that. But God forbid something happened to him. It's nice to, like you said, have someone has played a major league shortstop with the bat that he has to kind of, shift over there. But, hopefully it's Bichette mostly playing third, and I assume at some point he'll be the everyday DH more than anything. But we'll see what happens there. It's just another thing. Lastly, I kind of want to end the show on, obviously, it got reported on, or Howie made the announcement, Howie Rose, Mets, longtime radio announcer. It's going to be his final year this year. I don't know if that's a big surprise to anybody. He's kind of has wound down his duties over the last few years. Obviously, age and some health things, I think has added to that. But, absolute legend, one of the best there is, privileged to listen to him, growing up, calling games on the radio. And hopefully the Mets can get him a World Series that he can finally end his career on, calling a Mets World Series. That's all I keep thinking about. Hearing that news. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the announcement as we wrap up the show this week.
So I've been trying to think of what the right thing to say here. I am an aspiring play-by-play man, and Howie gave me some of the best advice that, I've received from anyone who's given me advice in terms of being in the field. He had a show on for one of his anniversaries. I think it was just being on the air for a pretty long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he hosted a show on WFAN. So after work, I called in, and I basically just said to him, first I asked him a question about the Rangers, of course, because he talked about it. He worked for the Islanders, but Howie is a Ranger fan at heart.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that,
Mm-hmm.
of course. But I asked him. I said, Howie, what should someone like me do? Who knows who I am? I do local sports here in the town that I live in. Nobody knows who I am. I asked him, I said, what should I do to kind of get my name out there? And he said, put it all out there. I'm paraphrasing, of course, and I do have the tape. Put it all out there. Just let everyone, send it to whomever, send it to everyone. Just throw stuff out there and see if it sticks. But he was very generous about giving that advice. A lot of people in that business wouldn't really give me the time of day to do that. Granted, he was hosting a talk radio show, but he didn't have to tell me that. He really did it. Over the years, I remember when Bob Murphy retired, right? I was 10, and I just remember, not hearing Bob's voice as an 11-year-old on the radio, and it was throwing me off. But then, obviously you had Gary and Howie at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a pretty easy transition from Bob Murphy to Howie and Gary, and then Gary ended up going to TV, as we know, and now Howie took over. And there are many instances where I would be in the car or I would be going somewhere and I wouldn't have the opportunity to watch, when the Mets were on MSG, WB11, Fox Sports Net, when he used to do games there, and then also SNY. I never had the opportunity because there were at certain points in my life I didn't have cable.
Mm-hmm.
So what would I do? Put on WFAN. And who would be there? Howie Rose. So he is and will always be the voice of a lot of our summers. We are incredibly privileged and grateful to have been there to witness a lot of those great calls. We put out a post, the roundtable for MMO for the writers on our experience, our thoughts on about Howie and his retirement, and a lot of people were referencing 2024 and stuff over the recent years, which is great, because his 2024 season on the radio was nothing but magical, especially during those playoffs. But the two things that I'll never forget with Howie were, one, obviously Matto, even though I wasn't really around for that. That was a very iconic hockey call. Saying that in the moment, not knowing who scored it, kind of taking a guess and having that be the iconic call, which they played on the radio all night after that win, is more than enough. But then the one that I mentioned in the post was his call for Johan Santana's no-hitter in 2012.
Sure.
Because Howie is a fan. He's like me and you. He's like Mike. He's like everyone else that writes for this blog. He was a fan. And he was so elated, and you could tell there was this shock in his voice because even himself, basically Mr. Met himself, Howie Rose, did not anticipate that this was going to happen. And there was this genuine, happiness and jubilant nature in his voice. And then to top it off, during Mets postgame or Mets Extra, when it was still called that back then, they had him and Gary Cohen do sort of this discussion about 15 minutes after postgame ended. And it was just two fans talking about the love for the Mets and how shocked and happy they were that this happened, and they both called it. So he's going to definitely be missed. Keith Radd and Pat McCarthy are going to do a great job, but no one can really replace Howie Rose, and we're really going to miss him. And, unfortunately, due to some health issues and, lowering his schedule, he won't be able to, go on any longer. But the good thing is that they're going to try and keep him around. So he'll still be, a host emeritus for every single event they have at Citi Field. So thankfully he's not going away, but he'll be missed.
Yeah, I'm sure Howie's still going to be MC and everything. I know that's his deal on top of it too, and he does a great job doing it. He's a Mets Hall of Famer, so he can kind of just come and go as he wants anyway, right? You just get to show up and you get like a pass, Probably Steve
Yeah.
Cohen probably gives you like a gold Mets badge or something. To show
Yeah,
whenever you want.
he can get it
He's one
whenever
of
he
those.
wants. Come on.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's sad to think about that we're not going to hear him on the radio putting in the books after this summer anymore. But you know, we've been blessed. The Mets are particularly not a successful franchise for most of my life, pretty much all of it. But we've been really lucky to have some phenomenal announcers call some really bad baseball for a long time. So at least we had that. So, you know, we wish him nothing but the best. And like I said, I want to hear Howie call a World Series win for the Mets. I want him to cap his season or his career off like that. So hopefully the Mets can make that happen. I know they're trying. No pressure, but that would be really nice. So hopefully they can get that done. But I think that's going to wrap everything up for this week. John Luke, thanks for coming on, man. We'll catch everybody next week. Try and preview before opening day. We made it, everybody. We made it. You know, it's getting warmer. The snow's gone. Spring is kind of here. And it's baseball season. So, you know, right now, everything's good in that standpoint. And, you know, we'll be here over the next few days and get you up to Thursday. But as always, folks, let's go, Mets.